Last week, I was asked how to know if your designs are good, both in terms of the visuals and also the overall user experience. And this question had me thinking for quite some time. In this video, I'm sharing my insights and also a checklist you can use to ensure that your designs are both intuitive and gorgeous. Before we go any further, let's get on the same page by what I mean when I say user experience and also the user interface. User experience, so UX, is how users interact with and navigate your product. It's the feeling they get when they use it, whether it's smooth and intuitive or if it's confusing and frustrating. User interface, UI, on the other hand, is what they see. It's the color, typography, buttons, and the visual elements that make the experience tangible. I'm a firm believer that a good experience needs strong visuals, and just like a polished UI cannot exist without a clear user flow, one doesn't work without the other. But we're going to look at them separately so it's easier for us to analyze. I like starting with the experience first because it often sets the foundation for the visuals. So let's dive into UX. The first thing you gotta check is if your design have a clear user flow. So understanding how users are moving through your product. Ask yourself, what are the main tasks users need to complete? What do users need to know in order to perform this action? And are there unnecessary steps causing friction? A clear, streamlined flow helps users achieve their goals without any confusion. And the second question shines a light on the support you need to provide to users. So things like tooltips, visual cues, and etc. The second thing to be on the lookout for is if you're choosing the right UI elements. We're not getting to UI just yet, but it's important that you keep in mind that each element, they serve a specific purpose. So choosing the right components is going to make the experience more intuitive. For example, there are situations in which you're going to be using checkboxes and orders in which you're going to be using radio buttons. So you gotta understand the use of each one so you can choose them intentionally. We often grasp how and when to use each element intuitively from our experience as users, but understanding the logic behind them helps us design with more clarity and purpose. One resource that I love for this is the Newson Norman Group website. They provide guidelines for practically all the UI elements you can think of. So buttons, checkboxes, breadcrumbs, menus, avatars, and more. Another go-to is checking established design systems like material design to understand their conventions when using elements. The third thing to check if you're providing a good UX is for you to prototype. With a clear flow and the right UI elements, I strongly advocate for you taking some time to prototype. And that's because sometimes the static design doesn't really give us the nuances of how the experience is going to feel like. If you'd like to dive deeper, I have a specific video about prototype, which you can check it out by clicking here. And the fourth thing to ensure a good UX is testing it with real users. I find that user experience is in a way personal. So while best practices and conventions are essential for you to get started, you can never really know if your UX is effective until real users engage with it. But don't worry, the product doesn't have to be built for you to test it out. You can take the prototype link that you used before. If you don't have the time and resources for that, having more people apart from just designers and product can really shine a light on how the experience is feeling. And now that we've covered these important things in terms of UX, now it's time for us to talk about the user interface. The first thing is for you to check accessibility. An interface is not good if it's not accessible. You may think that it looks good, but that's going to be making the experience poor. And as I mentioned, one doesn't exist without the other. So accessibility should always be your top priority. Ensure things like color contrast, legible font sizes depending on the device type, and the order of elements work for everyone, including those with visual impairments or users relying on assistive tech. The Start plugin in Figma is really good for you to check if you're meeting the accessibility criteria. And by the way, I also have a video on accessibility if you want to check it out here. The second thing for a good UI is consistent branding. This may be my background in advertising talking, but I can't emphasize enough how a consistent visual identity is crucial for a product. From color choices to typography, maintaining consistency reinforces trust and makes products feel more polished. Always be in sync with the brand guide, but also be aware that you may need to have some conventions specifically for when you're designing user interfaces. Let me bring you two examples. So recently I worked on these projects that in their color palette, they have very tricky colors for us to work with when we're thinking about accessibility. One of them had a very lime green and the other one a bright pink. I don't have to say much, but it's hard for these colors to meet the accessibility standards. So for the first one, I use the lime green for very small and decorative elements like icons. And in the second scenario, I also limited the use of the bright pink. So CTAs and again, decorative elements across the UI. So this was a way for us to ensure consistency, alignment with the brand identity, but at the same time, not forgetting accessibility. And the third thing is for you to guarantee the visual polish. In UI design, the details really matter. So consistent spacing, sizing of elements, alignments, clean typography, all these things, they really elevate our designs. Visual polish is one of those things that most users are not going to realize consciously, but that's really going to affect the image and the opinion that the user is going to create about your brand. I find that for me to guarantee visual polish, when working in Figma, the best thing is for me to constantly use auto layout and for me to create and maintain a design system. They make designs more consistent and they also streamline my workflow. I'm considering a specific video about visual polish. So if that's something you'd be interested in, please let me know in the comments. Here's a quick checklist to make sure your designs hit the mark. So for the user experience, define clear user flows. Make sure to choose the right UI elements based on the action you want the user to perform. Prototype and also test your prototype with real users. For the user interface, mind accessibility first, value consistent branding, and also ensure visual polish. Design is all about balance. If this checklist was helpful, I believe you may like this video where I mentioned 3 UI mistakes that you don't want to make when designing interfaces. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you in the next video. Happy designing!